It is the 13th day of the ongoing war between Israel and the militant group Hamas. American President Joe Biden wrapped up his wartime visit to Israel on Wednesday after voicing America's unequivocal support. In his nearly 8-hour-long visit to the country, President Biden managed to ensure a deal to get limited humanitarian aid into Gaza from Egypt, even as he urged Israelis not to allow rage over the deadly Hamas attack consume them like the U.S. did after 9/11, while telling them to follow the laws of war as well. A major concern ahead for the U.S. president remains how to prevent the Iran-backed Hezbollah from joining the war in Lebanon. According to reports, the Biden administration has privately been urging Israel not to launch a military campaign against Hezbollah. Washington is trying to keep the current war from spreading beyond Gaza. The U.S. recognizes that after the shock of the Hamas onslaught on the 7th of October, Israel needs to respond to the increased targeting of its northern border by Hezbollah. But as the Lebanese terror group continues to attack Israel, there are fears that Israel could initiate a military crackdown on Hezbollah to keep the upper hand. The U.S. has, however, cautioned Israel on the matter, stressing that an IDF mistake in Lebanon could spark a much larger war. And according to reports, Israel wants some $10 billion in its fight against Hamas. Before flying home after a brief Tel Aviv visit, President Biden said that he would ask Congress this week for an unprecedented aid boost to Israel in its fight with Hamas. Aid that is expected to be folded into a massive $100 billion package in Congress, which will also include Ukraine. This will be in addition to the $3.8 billion per year that America already sends Israel under a 10-year agreement that began back in 2016. With more aid imminent for Israel, a senior U.S. State Department official, Josh Paul, has resigned from his position, criticizing the Biden administration's response to the situation in the Middle East. Protesting against the Biden administration's decision to continue sending weapons and ammunition to Israel, Paul said the Biden administration's, quote, blind support for one side was leading to policy decisions that were short-sighted, destructive, unjust, and contradictory to the very values we publicly espouse. All right, for more on this, we are now being joined by Professor Susanna Heschel from New Hampshire. She is Eli M. Black Distinguished Professor at Dartmouth College. Thank you so much for joining us on WION. Professor, it seems that there is a dilemma that the U.S. faces in the Middle East. Obviously, there are multiple voices that it needs to balance and take along as this war continues. But something that was very concerning was also that we learned that the State Department is advising its citizens to leave Lebanon while commercial flights are still available. So can you give us a sense of this dilemma and where we stand right now?
It's an enormous dilemma involving many countries, so I'm not sure I can encapsulate it briefly. But I do believe that President Biden's strategy is to win support and trust from Israel and from its very battered Prime Minister Netanyahu in order to then exert some control over the decisions, military decisions, that Israel makes in the coming weeks regarding both Gaza and Lebanon. In other words, he wants to win the trust of Netanyahu in order to then restrain him as much as possible. You asked about Lebanon as well. Lebanon has been suffering terribly for a long time, as you know, and ever since the terrible explosion in the port, there's been an exodus of some of the finest people from Lebanon, professionals, academics, and so forth. And the government almost doesn't exist. There is no proper infrastructure, for instance, of electricity. So the concern would be that Lebanon will fully collapse. That would be a grave concern and result also in a terrible loss of life and also the creation of possibly hundreds of thousands of refugees. So that's the situation as I see it. I would like Israel to be restrained in its response to these attacks. The most important issue on the table is finding those hostages, over 200, finding them quickly and bringing them home.
And Professor, Qatar, we know, has a hold on Hamas. Many of Hamas leaders stay lavishly in Qatar. Uh, I mean, the Hamas chief lives in Qatar. So I guess the question is, do you think the United States can reach some kind of an agreement with Qatar? Can the United States trust Qatar in help release these hostages that we're also concerned about?
Well, within the framework of what has been developing between Israel and the Gulf states, which really means also Israel, Europe, the United States, and those Gulf states, to create relationships, for instance, between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and the possibility also of a relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia, diplomatic ties. It would be unwise for Qatar to continue in this direction, supporting Hamas. It would eventually lead it to be excluded from the possibilities that are arising from the new relationships between Israel and the Gulf states. And let's just be clear about that. The reason the Gulf states were ultimately interested in developing these relationships was because they also want to foster a stronger economy. And Israel offers tremendous possibilities in terms of academic, intellectual work, technology, cutting edge, medical care, and so forth. So it is for the good of all sides to have that relationship and not be in war. So for Qatar to try to foster Hamas isn't going to accomplish much for that country nor for its population.
Professor Heschel, thank you so much for joining us on WION and for your insight.
Thank you.